Welcome, everyone. I'm so glad you could make time for this today. I'm Tripura Champala. I'll be your host today. Just a quick note before we dive in. This is a 60-minute interactive session, and it will be recorded. It's hosted by the organization team, and a small crew behind the scenes are Sanjana Pai, John Mortimer, Joss Collister, and myself. So today's event is designed to share the latest research and systems approaches in organizations, and just as importantly, to create a space for real learning, reflection, and conversation. Together, we'll look at how organizations are actually applying systems approaches in practice and what we as practitioners can take away from their experiences. Here is how the next 1 hour will unfold. For the first 15 minutes, Joss will walk us through the paper's key findings. Then we'll move into a 20-minute panel discussion with our guests today. And we'll save the last 15 minutes for your questions. So hold on to your thoughts as they come up, or you can post it on the Miro board here. Joss, are you sharing the Miro board, or would you like me to?
I am, yes, we have it shared.
Okay, yeah. So please, if you all can click on the Miro board, that would be great. So if you'd like to follow us along and dig more into the details afterwards, you can also download the paper by clicking on the link here. Now, so are you able to see the?
Yeah, we can see it fine, I think. Yeah.
Okay, great.
Should I jump in?
Yeah, okay. Let me introduce to our four guests joining us today. James Stauch, who is a social innovation and systems sense maker, educator, and an author, and Abirambika Ravivarman. She helps leaders and teams to navigate complexity and change by building the human capabilities to thrive. And Erica Engelen, systems thinker, specializing in human-centric organizational and resilience. We also have Darko Markovic, who specializes in systemic executive coaching, leadership development, and systemic approach to organizational cultural change. Thank you all for so much for being here today. It means a lot to have your time and your thinking with us today. So, Joss, I'll hand it over to you for the paper presentation.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Tripura. Good to see you all here. Erica, Aisha, Darko, so on. I have the honor of presenting to you for the next 15 minutes. So here we are. We're going to talk about the contents of the paper and some of the insights before we pass it over to hear a bit from the panelists on their perspective on all of this question of systems approaches in organizations. It's a very big, hairy, scary idea and subject, shall we say, that's still, I'd say, a lot up in the air in terms of what does it mean and how do you go about doing it. But we're going to unpack some of that today. We still have people joining, but before I get started, I'll just say a few words about the methodology in terms of how we did the research and about the paper. So a lot of it's web research, going out there and seeing resources and organizations. And of course, we are the organizations hub. We've been working on this kind of a challenge, hosting events, talking to people and so forth for about 3 or 4 years now. As you saw, a team there, Tripura and Sanjana and so on. So we have quite a bit of intuitive knowledge built up around that. We've been talking to people. We do polls and questions on our website. All of this goes into the paper and how we formulate it. We use algorithms to synthesize up some of the some of the ideas and content of the paper. And it is an unofficial guide. We are evaluating an emerging field, which is not the easiest thing to do. So encourage you to take it for what it is. And what it is, I would say, is a lot of really useful resources that can help connect you into, you'll see them here now, interesting books and methodologies and people and organizations and so forth. So it's definitely has that foundational base of being a really good database of resources. But then hopefully we'll be able to kind of give an overview of what this field looks like. So I'll talk about some of the important trends and changes that are happening is I think the best we can do at this time. So to start with, what are we talking about here? Systems, approaches, and organizations. It is systems thinking, as you can imagine, which is this way of looking at the world that helps us better understand complex systems. And it's that in the context of management and organizations, right? So how do we bring people together and work together with people and resources and technologies and processes and all of this in productive ways in organizations? And how do we leverage systems thinking instead of a lot of reductionist thinking that we normally use in management to really think about doing that differently, organizing and managing in different ways? And a lot of people see the importance and relevance of that. It's why you're here today, but many others also. And we'll be looking at some of those people, some of those case studies too, and organizations and so forth. So yeah, we've done work already in the Organizations Hub, thinking around this. What does it actually mean? How can we rethink strategy, organizational identity, mission, values, operations, structure, of course, is an important part of it. And you'll find some of these resources if you want to dig into this question of, well, what are we actually talking about here? There's a link there that will kind of guide you through some of those questions. So this is not a lesson on, systems approaches and management. It's more a review of the ecosystem. And that word ecosystem is quite important. There's many ways that we could have approached this challenge of evaluating what's going on here. But it's this idea that if we really want to unlock these ideas, if we really want to make big changes happen in the world, it's not one idea, one person, one organization. It is an ecosystem. And an ecosystem is many different things that need to come together in synergistic and aligned ways to really unlock the potential of all these ideas and really transform how we do management and organize. So that's how we think about it. And we think across all these different dimensions that are needed to build a successful, thriving ecosystem. And there's four main areas there. On the left, we're talking about all the ideas and tools and learning space. On the right, we're talking about the practice and the application and so forth. So top left is the research and tools. Let's take a look at some of those. We'll just quickly guide you through these. Won't go into all of it. It's in the paper, but we'll take a quick look. So here we just pulled out some of the main ideas and people have contributed to this. It stretches all the way back to the origins of systems thinking, which is 80 years or so old now. You obviously have people like Russell Ackoff and Stafford Bear and Peter Senge. You can see it there. Margaret Wheatley, Mike Jackson, so on and so forth. And these are great resources. You can't click on them here, but if you open up the PDF guide and you click on them, almost everything is linked in the guide. So that's why it's such a great resource, because you can just click on it and it'll take you straight to the book or the organization. So that is a valuable resource. So that's some of the books, the foundational ideas. A lot of them are back in the 20th century. Tools and methods, a little bit thinner on the ground, I would say, not so much here. A lot of them are more contemporary, I would say. So maybe you've heard of sociocracy. Coming out of the Netherlands, that's quite an active kind of community and practice. It's one of the most active ones. We got to talk to some of the people who lead that as part of our Organizations Hub, and do think it's very reflective of a systems approach, this whole circle way of organizing. Vanguard method is another one, systems thinking for service design and thinking about better ways to do services in organizations, platform design toolkit, which is this kind of ecosystem approach to organizations and thinking about your organization as a platform or an ecosystem. Cynefin framework is another one that's been quite useful in helping people, recognize what sort of environments they're working in, simple, complicated, complex, and what sort of approaches you should be taking in those environments. And that's a little sample of the, kind of methodologies out there. There are many other tools that are used. Famous ones, iceberg model, systems mapping, two loops, a lot of futures tools, co-design practice, and so forth. Causal loop diagrams, I guess, are a big one. System dynamic modeling is used a lot in the United States of America. And yeah, some of the tools. I'm going to stay going for the sake of time. This section down here is all around awareness and learning. So where do people actually become aware of this? Are there media channels around it? Not that many, I wouldn't say. There aren't really good channels for really letting the world know about this, I would say. There's Systems Thinker, which is an educational resource that's kind of discontinued at this stage, but has a lot of great articles. Business Illustrated does great graphics around this. Verpi, Boundaryless again, they host this podcast. Corporate Rebels actually do a really, I think, pretty good job of critiquing corporate life and trying to find different ways of doing things. Learning. There are some good resources here. So we have the Open University, System Dynamics Society, Think School of Leadership, particularly around leadership, as mentioned. Sociocracy Academy is just some of them. I think we have more in the paper also. Connecting, maybe not that many spaces in terms of really good communities and conferences and so forth. I mean, sociocracy is one. And this one here, Systems and Complexity in Organizations, it's more based in the UK, but I think they start to have different hubs around the world also. And they've been hosting conferences recently also. So that's some of the connecting spaces. People. I was going to ask you actually, just to do a check-in. How many of these people do you know of and their ideas? So let's just take 30 seconds to take a look through here. There's how many people there? There's 20 people there. Maybe put in the chat a number in terms of how many of these people do you know of? We'll take 30 seconds, should we? Maybe who's your favorite thinker here? Okay, 2, 3, 10. Okay, 1. Great. So just to quickly flick through some of them, Margaret Wheatley, she wrote that book back up there around complexity theory and management and the new science, I think it was called, applying chaos theory and the ideas of living systems to management. Helen Bevan, particularly in healthcare and large-scale systems change in healthcare, kind of bottom-up movements for change in organizations. Ed Morrison, we've had him on this as part of our hub. He does strategic doing and methodology, a kind of agile methodology. David Stroh, systems thinking for social change. Jean Bolton, yeah, maybe quite a few people know of Jean. We had her recently at the London Hub meetup. Joseph Cole. You probably know of Nora Bateson, David Snowden, Alex Lalou, developed reimagining organizations, the Teal organization. Scott Page, actually, amazing course and book around complexity and the need for diversity in teams. Maybe Peter Senge is probably one of the most famous here. Learning organizations, the fifth discipline, they're kind of classics in this space if you're not familiar with them. Okay, to stay going, this is a bit of a whirlwind tour of everything that's out there. Yeah, who are the people interested in this? So we analyzed the data from our LinkedIn followers at the Hub page. It's about 1,000 of them. And these are some of the people, design and human-centered practitioners, strategic designers, service designers, and so forth. We've got systems change leaders, founders, executive and consultants, technology and engineer professionals, research and academia. In the paper, we actually kind of lay out their profiles of some of the challenges they have and so forth. Moving along then, some of the organizations that can kind of help you with this. Again, it's Corporate Rebels and Boundaryless that will, help you think about changing your organization. Innovisor, you may not be familiar with them. They actually do interesting work around analyzing the social network in your organization to think about how to create kind of bottom-up change. And Together Institute is working on developing communities and supporting purpose-driven communities networks and the leaders who steward them. And that's it. There's just a couple of case studies here. I'm not actually going to go into those now because they're in the paper, and you're welcome to take a look at them. Just to give a few of the highlights before we move on to hear from others. In the paper, we pull out these kind of 5 main areas. I guess they're not specific to 2026. They've been brewing away for some time. Starting with this first one, the rebranding, the great rebranding. So it's the idea that these ideas have been around for a long time, right? Cybernetics, general systems theory, and so forth. And they're obviously becoming more relevant and needed in the world as the world becomes more complex and dynamic. But as they become adopted, they become rebranded, for better, for worse. For worse, we might call systems washing. They take all sorts of forms that might not be reflective of, the original ideas. But in many ways, they're mainstreaming, and there's all sorts of challenges and different dynamics going on as we go through that process. And essentially, they start to take new names as we go through that, and to some extent become disconnected from the original systems theory. Well, sometimes, are reflective of that, other times aren't. So that's one of the main kind of evolutions, I guess, over the past couple of decades, reinventing change. This one resonates quite deeply with many of our followers, the desire to make change in organizations and a recognition that traditional change management kind of linear processes really aren't reflective of the underlying complexity of human beings and how they work or don't work together in organizations. So a lot of interest in this the messiness of change, the reality of change, and, just going beyond these formulaic and linear kind of change processes towards real complexity. So change fatigue is what this one is characterized by. Ecosystems, the shift towards, as the world becomes more interconnected, the rise of platforms and ecosystems is shaping whole industries, really, and it's difficult to ignore. And it's a change from very close, kind of well-bounded organizations to having to participate in broader ecosystems and recognizing your interdependency and a lot more kind of fluidity to your boundaries and so forth. And systems leadership and systems coaching. We have a few coaches here today, maybe able to speak to this, but we know this is a term that's definitely on the rise here. You can see it. A lot of interest in systemic coaching, which kind of goes beyond, the individual and focusing on them to actually think about them in broader kind of context of the teams they work with and so forth. And you can see here systemic leadership. And there's an obvious need for that, to really leaders who kind of step outside of their boundaries, create new spaces to bring people together and are ultimately interested in really transforming systems. So those are some of the highlights. The last one here is around Agile and the limitations of Agile. I guess we've known this for some time, but it's quite apparent that it creates these kind of pockets of agility, but they remain in a corporate ocean of existing ways of working, and they don't really transform the enterprise in the way that people might hope for. So that's that. Try and stay on time there, and hopefully that was useful. Hopefully you'll take a look at the paper. And I'm going to pass it back to Tripura for others to discuss.
Thank you, Josh. That gives us a foundation for the next conversation. Um, so we have like 5 minutes for each of our guests to speak, followed by question and answers for 15 minutes. So let's start with James. Hi, James. Could you tell us a little bit
Hey,
more about
Chipper.
how are
Sure,
you?
thank you. Yeah, I'll just in the chat, I'll put a link to my book, which I won't discuss, but you can download a free PDF. And I've also included a link to a more recent series of articles that I've been posting on Substack and also reposting on LinkedIn. As a newsletter. So just a little bit about me. I'm James Stauch. I'm based in the South Shore of Nova Scotia, Canada, which is the traditional, current, and future territory of the Mi'kmaq. Uh, I probably spent about half my career in philanthropy, broadly speaking, and half in academia. So most of my clientele are philanthropic or civil society organizations, although in the last couple of years I've been doing more work in the private sector and with government. So just a confession, I'm trained as a planner, and I love how there's a discussion of planning and some of the distinctions between planning and emergence in this paper. And I've really spent, my career arc is really like coming around to appreciating and trusting emergence in relation to planning. Not that I totally don't trust planning, but I think it's a balance. It's that balance between order and chaos, or structure and spontaneity. So I agree with a lot of the observations in the report. That we are in a new world of greater complexity, greater nonlinear change, where these kinds of approaches are absolutely necessary. I do think they are still largely aspirational, and we can get into why I think that way, rather than an overwhelming trend, let's say. I think there's lots of counter trends happening that are kind of in the exact opposite direction. But I think long term, this is really canny and important to think about. So I work with managers to just think deeply about their organization as a complex adaptive system, which is in line with the paper, thinking more like an organism or an ecosystem and less like a deterministic mechanical machine or system. And so, you can't fix or optimize in such a context, but you can shift or redirect, or to use Herbert Simon's phrase, satisfice. I also help organizations appreciate that every innovation is in some ways a flame that casts a shadow. But sometimes you don't see that shadow for years or decades. And it's as true of social innovation as it is of commercial or technological innovation. So anything that looks like progress always has some kind of feedback loop or ripple effects that we may not anticipate, and we may not even observe or know about for a long time. That sort of tends to balance the books, if you like. So I'll stop there, and thank you for bringing me into the conversation.
Yeah, we'll have more questions and answers followed by this. Thank you, James. So next up is Abhirami.
Hi, everyone. Thanks, Tripura, and thanks, Josh, for having me. And absolutely resonating with what James just shared. I'm based in Toronto, and I started my career as a banker. So from banking to I do leadership development and team coaching. My journey has, into the systems side was inspired by Otto. So when I was part of one of the programs that he did, and that was where my inspiration and key learning into the systems side kind of emerged for me. And the whole emergence, I think, while we experience it in pockets, but having the structure and the terminology and actually an approach was very helpful. And I did get into systemic team coaching. So I'm a credentialed coach. So with teams, and I do one-on-one leadership coaching as well as team coaching, I think that the the interesting part was when you coach the team, you're not coaching the individual, of course, you're coaching the system more than the individual performance of the team. So that was where I think the biggest, I think, the magic I saw. So I call this the human field. I mean, that's a work, and I've been writing some papers on it. It's about the space between people and how, when you tap into that space, you see, the system move towards, even if it's uncertainty or change, there is that team who are able to adapt and move forward more confidently. So that's been my inspiration and work. And I'm very happy to be here with all of you who are doing some amazing work in the system space. Thank you.
Thank you, Abirambika. Would you like to talk a little bit more about any of the key insights now, or you want to hold it for later?
Say that again. Sorry, but I was losing your audio a little bit.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, I was just asking if there's any particular key insights that you want to talk a little bit more about, or we can hold it for later.
We can hold it. I'm good. Yeah, we can go. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Next up is Erica.
Yes, thank you so much for having me here. I think it's truly exciting to have this organizational topic today, and that we see so many people who are eager to learn more about it or are already invested in it. So that's awesome. So I'm from Belgium, and since we are making confessions, I started my career in marketing. It's great to see that we also don't have a linear career path, that we all kind of are already a bit systemic in that way as well. I'm the founder of the Flow Hive, which is a collective of individual experts that enables purpose-driven organizations to become truly complex, adaptive organizations. So to say goodbye to rigid operating models and embrace today's complexity. The way that we do that is we don't work with leadership. Mainly, we work with people in the teams. And we actually map the hell out of things. So that's usually the practice that we do most. But we need to make people step back from their own perspectives and see the whole, and then see how they can find the areas in the organizations which can hold that complexity, and how they can create more stewardship in those areas, so that whilst we're doing that, we train them to also learn those practices, learn how to collaborate in a different way, take real ownership. So that actually, and that might sound really weird, but my main objective is to make ourselves redundant as quickly as possible. So we really train them so that they can do it themselves, and they don't need us anymore. So that's the way we operate.
Yeah, wonderful. Thank you, Erica. I know, like, we have these different perspectives from the leadership side, training the team side, and the academic side.
Yeah.
So this panel is wonderful. Thanks,
Yeah.
Erica, for your introduction again. Next up, Darko, please introduce about yourself, or you can talk about the insights.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Tripura. I'm Darko Markovic. I'm based in Serbia, Belgrade. I also work globally. I work with leaders, founders, CEOs, leaders of different kinds of organizations, really from family businesses to corporations to civil society organizations. Really, my experience is quite wide in there. And as Erica said, since we are doing confessions, my roots originally, a little bit like in my past life, I'm coming from psychology and psychotherapy. And I can confess that psychologists and psychotherapists are not necessarily the best organizational consultants. And I can tell you why. Since when you come from there, you believe a lot you believe a lot on let's say effectiveness of individual change. And then there's a moment when you confront it with organizations, and when you realize that some of individual changes doesn't change the system. And then you really realize, okay, wow, we need something else. It's not just investing in individual changes that actually will change the whole. So for me, the biggest learning is how to work with the whole. So I went to Netherlands, I went to UK, I went to different places to learn how to work with the whole, not only with parts. And a very important piece, I think, for me is last year I wrote a book in Serbian, which is called Systemic Change in Organizations. It's been just translated and published in Slovenia too, and hopefully in English soon. But one important piece for me there, and maybe connected to the findings here, I see also this idea of the change fatigue, and that people looking, organizations are looking for different ways to deal with the change. And my approach to that is to work with organizational patterns and to have a little bit deeper understanding where these patterns are coming from, what's their reason for existence for organizations, what's the cost of having them at the moment, how they're limiting us, etc., etc. So in a way, if I would say in a nutshell, I also speak a lot about organization as a living system, but for me, this is not a metaphor, not even a mental model, so to say, not a theory. I think for me, living system is something that exists underneath all formal structures. So basically, even in the most hierarchical organization, even in the most horrible organization that you could imagine, the living system reality is still there. So for me, it's more working with leaders to understand how actually a living system works and what the living system needs, not just to be more performant, but also to be more healthy. And this is where I work, basically, in trying to create more healthy systems and more performant systems where people feel included, where people feel connected. So basically, making this discrepancy between the formal structure and the living system reality closer. And I think that's more or less where I intervene.
Wonderful. Thank you, Darko. I think we are great with time, probably a lot earlier. So we've got like almost 30 minutes, 28 minutes for us to kind of have a question and answer sessions and wrap up. So yeah, please, anyone who would like to ask any questions or make comments, please go ahead.
Maybe I could just ask a follow-up question, and then we could open it more. And picking up on what Darko left off there about living systems and, and what you said, James, about, machines, these two worldviews of the organization. I think we all bump up against that in some way. What do you think is one way to help people approach that alternative way of looking at the organization, right? Because we're quite well grounded in this machine metaphor of the organization. How do you help people step outside of that and embrace a more messy reality, the complexity, and that reality of living systems, should we say? I pose this because I think there's a lot of people here who are kind of new to this and trying to figure out like what it means. Is there something each of you could share in terms of one idea or approach that you'd use to help people go in that direction? Yeah, maybe Erica, you'd like to start off.
Yeah, well, I don't know if there's one practice that I could advocate for. I think it's very difficult. That's what I've experienced. It's very difficult in organizations to come with practices or methodologies or lenses through which they can see the organization and then finding them in a state in which they can accept that because there is a huge gap between how organizations have always worked and have always done things and the vocabulary that they use and the things that we see and that we talk about. An organization is indeed still very often led as a machine, and what we want to show to them is something completely different, and it's highly uncomfortable. So they will resist. No, I think we were kind of lucky because we've already been saying for decades that the world is changing at such a high pace, at such a huge velocity, that we need to have organizations find ways to become more adaptive. And they didn't. They just stuck to what they always had done, and they kept believing in the fact that it will all just work out. We just need to stick it out for a little bit longer, and then whatever worked before will work again. But it doesn't. And I think on top of the pace that we had, which is already many leverage points in the system, we now have the gift of AI. And not because I'm such a huge fan of AI, but I think this is for a lot of rigid organizations who still work in that kind of industrialized system, this will be either Pandora's box or it will be a Trojan horse. And they need to decide. Either you are going to stick your head in the sand and think that you can have benefits from AI, that it will help you to cut costs, lose people, do more work faster, which it won't. Or you can recognize that in order to really have all the opportunities and benefits from AI, you need to understand your socio-technical system first. You need to have the big picture so that you can then see, okay, which are the bounded contexts that I can isolate within my organization that can hold that complexity that we see today. Where is the areas in which we can allow risk, in which we can be adaptive, in which we can innovate, and which other parts of the organization can we then protect? Because right now they're just smothering AI all over the place, and it's going to blow up everywhere in a lot of organizations because they sit on a big ball of mud of enterprise architecture, software architecture that just isn't able, authority isn't in the place where AI is. And that's where you need to make fast decisions. So I think we have a gift here for systems thinking to suddenly be an aha moment for a lot of organizations because it will be necessary. So I don't know if we can convince them. I think there is now something going on that is bigger than us that will help us bring in those lenses that they need.
AI
was it quite a lengthy answer?
It was great. I hear AI is the mother of unintended consequences, and we need to now eventually step back and see the bigger system if we're going to survive and thrive in that world. I think that's great. Maybe pass it on, shall I? Abirambika?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. I think, just building off what Erika just shared, what AI is also doing is showing the lens on the human systems, right? Like when we think about organizations, we talk about work like a machine, and that's the narrative we've heard so long. Then that's what right now is being challenged to saying, then what is left is have ability to have the kind of relational strengths to survive and sustain the uncertainty in itself. So it's like again, organizations as a living system was always like, okay, it's nice to hear, but we're seeing that and experiencing at the moment. I think that's the shift we are seeing. So focusing on what does those relational social spaces look like? How do we connect with people at workplace? I mean, if you really go back, looking at some of these small organizations, they work mainly because they've had built that relational foundation. And as we scale up, that's threatened, that's difficult to hold, that's becomes very rich or something nice to have. I think we're seeing those lenses shift as well. Yeah.
Great. James, would you like to add to this?
Yeah, I mean, I think that when we think about the entry point for organization leaders, there are so many different pathways. There's not one way in, and in practice, I think a lot of leaders come to this or come to be systems curious by kind of trial and error. And there's a huge Venn overlap between being kind of systems aware and being just, in my view, being a kind of strong leader, which to me involves like empathy, a sense of ethics, obviously intelligence, but specifically sort of pattern observing skills, pushing yourself to the edge of chaos without falling into the abyss of chaos. These are kind of like almost universally acknowledged leadership capacities that aren't specific to systems, but at the same time, they have a very significant overlap. So it leads a lot of leaders to being systems curious. And I prefer to think of systems curiosity rather than systems washing. I know the paper does refer to systems washing, but and yes, I think there may be times when it's sort of propagandized, but I think in most cases it's an earnest or honest attempt to be curious about systems. And I sometimes see academics, systems scholars, even some consultants who seem to kind of almost resent when they encounter, newbies or new leaders talking about systems as almost like interlopers. Like there's a lack of definitional imprecision or model fidelity, or they're shifting the boundary or the definition of what this term is, this time-honored thing over here that we've spent our career modeling and working out. And I think that's not a productive way to encourage a kind of mass dissemination and adoption of systems approaches. The other thing I wanted to mention, I mean, AI has been brought up, and I think one of the useful ways in which you can demonstrate to companies, especially, is that an ecosystemic approach makes sense. Is that we're already seeing, for example, in the U.S. right now, we're seeing talks between OpenAI and the U.S. government about a 5% stake. And this is part of a kind of overall new trend towards, it's not really socialism, it's kind of strategic capitalism, where a public risk is married to a public claim. And so the idea that AI will be these platforms will be so pervasive and dominant in the future that there is an active debate about, well, do we nationalize these platforms? That's not a debate confined to the left either. And so, how do we actually plan as a government, let's say, for a future with mass unemployment, if that is to be the future? Elon Musk would say, well, universal high income or universal basic income, but how do you pay for that? And so we're now seeing governments, for reasons of sovereignty, security, and so on, say, well, maybe we could take a pre-distributive approach, actually take a stake in these platforms, even nationalize or start our own platforms. And then the benefits, the fruits of that could be distributed. So these are radical ideas that we've kind of been complacent the last few decades in having a fairly static set of economic assumptions about what is, the sort of soup we're all, or the water we're all operating in. And I think a lot of those assumptions are being blown up. And so people are forced now to think beyond their company, beyond their industry in a really, really big ecosystemic way.
Great. Thank you. Darko, maybe pass it over to you.
Yeah, I do it quite quickly. I think just a little bit building on what others said before. I think there are different paths, different ways how to bring in the systemic awareness. But what I also realized that is not that the awareness and understanding and maybe more cognitively approaching systems, maybe sometimes it's not enough. And what I actually argue a lot in my book and in approach and my work with leaders, I think it's development of systemic empathy. So empathy not only with individuals, but also empathy with the system as a whole. So the moment you put leaders in that position, so wondering, okay, how is your system doing really? And this is the moment when they feel that there is something more than processes, procedures, departments, and a little bit like making this connection to the whole and teaching them how to be open more to heal, to hear what the system really needs in order to move forward. And some things are not so obvious. So you need a little bit more to understand how the living system actually works underneath. But the critical point there are the patterns that I already start speaking a little bit. And this is a little bit the pain in the system that some of the patterns start creating. And when the pain and the pressure inside and how actually the patterns are blocking the performance, blocking the results, blocking the realization of the potential at one moment, I think this pain in the system also creates more readiness. And then maybe then sometimes leaders are more open, more ready to, okay, we tried this, we tried that, it didn't work. But maybe this systemic lens and seeing these patterns from a systemic, in a systemic perspective, and understanding the reasons why they are there, how they're serving us, maybe this gives also motivation to think wider. So not only to look in a very compartmentalized, analytical way.
Yeah, I guess so much of how we think and talk is all about the past. I mean, almost all of it is, isn't it? And I think what you're saying is, how can you refocus and create a question that relates to the whole? I'm thinking of like the health. What's the health of your organization? It's a holistic concept, isn't it? I'm sure people would then try and break it down into 100 different KPIs, but at least for a moment, it stops you and makes you think, wait a sec, there's a whole thing, and we can think about it, maybe a metric that associates with the whole, the health of the whole, and so forth. Okay. Anja, is it?
Yes, thank you, Anja. Very close. Thank you for Darko mentioning the emotional life of organizations. I think it's so ever important. I'm coming from an organization which for 8 decades now has pioneered sociotechnical systems and system psychodynamic, looking at how the unconscious, the social unconscious in organization is creating a lot of resistances, especially when it comes to AI, but generally change, and looking at system psychodynamics and using a psychoanalytical approach to management and organizations as such. And what I noticed by looking at the mapping, as you did, I noticed that a lot of the approaches you drew out were focusing on the cognitive, on cognitive measures and on design principles, but that didn't mention any of the embodied systems approaches or the arts-based or experiential learning systems approaches. And I'm curious about that. And not that I necessarily want to criticize your methods or your approach, but thinking about the state of systems thinking in organizations, I think it's ever so important, especially as we speak about AI, to think about a more physical and experiential learning of what it means to create meaningful work. So I'm curious about what kind of reactions that might bring
Yeah, I
in
can
the
pass.
system, as we are a socio-technical system here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I can pass that to the speaker. I know, Darko, a lot of your work is about trauma, right? And trauma is about the body, and so it's very much related. I don't know if anyone else wants to pick up, or do you want to speak? Okay.
Well, I could add I just agree. I think that that's a little bit kind of the missing piece, I would say. We can think of how methodologies can develop further, but it's more about, are we seeing the whole picture? And part of the picture is maybe what Anja was calling emotional side. People who are from coaching, they know that you can focus on doing, but you can also focus on being, especially when you work with people. So how people are doing something and what's the quality of being. Exactly the same thing you can apply on organizations. You can see, okay, how organizations are doing things, but also how organizations are being. And that's exactly where the maybe organizational health comes in the picture. And if the organizations are living systems, that I believe so, organizations can also be traumatized, like living beings, like us, like our families. And more, I think this is going to be probably topic we'll be speaking more in the future, that organizational trauma is becoming one important topic on the agenda, I would say.
Anybody else want to speak to this before we move on?
I can add a little bit from a coaching perspective as well. So especially change aspect, the change fatigue, the traditional change management approach to what right now the change curves are happening. So there's a change that goes down and then the next change starts. Whereas what we are seeing now is constant circles of change before people can actually even think or sense the first change. There's already 2-3 cycles ahead of change. So we're seeing that happen. I've seen, at least from a coaching perspective, it helps people to recognize those emotions or the whole process, and then be able to adapt or build the capacity to change and slightly seeing a bit of resilience. So yeah, just thought I'll add that angle. So coaching is playing a significant role, I see, as yeah.
Great. Tripura, do you want to pick up the question in the chat? One of them, Jonathan, I think it is.
Yeah. So Jonathan is asking if are there limits to the scale and complexity of systems beyond which they begin working against their own goals? If yes, how do these systems need to adapt? Are there patterns? Anyone would like to answer that?
Well, I can take a stab at it. I don't know if the answer will be satisfying. Personally, I don't think it has to do with scale, with size. I also don't think it really has to do anything with the level or the abundance of complexity. I think rigid organizations can even be very small. I think it mainly has to do with how much control are you trying to push onto your organization to keep everything in place, and how much does that take away stewardship and autonomy of the people who are part of your system? I think if you have a small organization or a really big organization in which nobody can really feel that they are part of the system, that they can engage with it, that they can take stewardship, that they can make decisions, then it doesn't matter about size or complexity. It won't work. It will work against their own goals because it can't really live as an ecosystem or as a living system. So it will break because of the level of control. So I hope that is kind of a question, an answer to the question that he poses.
Yeah, maybe I'll pass it to others, but yeah, I know personally you see silos in teams of 3 or 4 people, don't you? So we always associate these things with big organizations, but I guess they just get more amplified, don't they? More externalized, don't they? Maybe they're more internal, more subjective and more under the hood when you're smaller. But when you get larger, they're like a building, so you can actually see the thing, and boundaries and so forth. But they're there all the way through, aren't they? That was one of my discoverings also. Anybody else want to pick up on this?
Yeah, I mean, I noticed in the paper there's some case studies or examples of organizations that are quite flat that have sort of eliminated. There was one that eliminated, I think, 10,000 middle management positions. That's intriguing, but I'm not yet convinced that is either essential or even vital to that, like the flattening, to achieving this more organic ecosystemic approach. I think there may be legitimate cases. There are legitimate cases where certain hierarchies exist for certain good and defensible reasons. The agile island phenomenon really resonated with me. But I do see, like, I see a lot of organizations with enlightened middle managers, say in governments or in companies, that are interested in systems, or frankly, they're just curious, they're open, they're trusting, and they're doing some really cool things within their own little shop, their own little kind of little island of coherence, but they are sort of entangled in these rigid, larger systems. And those systems have like positions, procedures, rituals, best practices, often perverse incentive structures that maintain a certain expected identity and business model. But I don't think we should throw out the agile islands. I think the agile islands are necessary. They're not dead ends. They're precursors to me. Like if you get enough agile islands, you actually are building resilience of the whole, right? Agile parts create a resilient whole, whereas rigid parts create a fragile whole. And so I think it may be I do get that agile islands can just spin out and just be kind of on their own and irrelevant and unnoticed. But I also think they are where the seeds of some of this scaled or disseminated change can actually occur or start.
But it does require that networking between them, doesn't it? I guess that's what's
absolutely, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Anybody else want to pick up on
Maybe
this
one,
with Darko?
yeah, maybe just a little bit, maybe side view on that. I mean, of course, we missed the story of the organization exactly. And when I look at the organizations, I'm always curious about history, actually, how maybe this complexity came into place. Maybe it didn't come overnight. So it was a moment, probably of several moments. And then the question is, what kind of complexity is that? Because the word complexity can be used for all sorts of things. So it's a little bit like, okay, what kind of complexity is that? And what that kind of complexity is doing for the system. And a little bit like, this is how the work with patterns actually work. So you are wondering, okay, instead of simply judging it, maybe you step back and wonder, okay, so what was the original reason for this over complexity to exist in this system? And what was the original solution for? And perhaps at the moment now it goes against us, but maybe originally it was serving something else. And sometimes you need to dig into that in order to outgrow the pattern.
I'll just quickly add, I think the capacity to sense subtle shifts in system before it becomes way big or complex, I think that's a key piece as well. And then the question of how much complexity can a system hold, right? Still holding that capacity to sense. So just in a very practical, what I've seen, and if when I'm coaching teams, there are some things that happen, very small things which are ignored and said, okay, fine, that's just we'll move past. But all of that adds up, and then there is a big change that happens. So somewhere that sensing the subtleness, I see as an ability as well. I think systems always gives clues. They leave ways for us to notice. That noticing is also challenging when we are in such a pace. So that's a key area of how, as practitioners of system or being in the system, we have a lens to see.
That's great. Thanks, Abirambika. I think we are up 3 more minutes for us to wrap up. So before we wrap up, please save the date. Our next event is on September 22nd. It's about when the system sees itself, a conversation-led approach to systemic inquiry in organizations. So you can all sign up in the link here, which is on the top right-hand corner. And before you drop off, we would like to have your feedback on how this session went and about the paper, and what kind of topics you would like to see next for our C-Hub organization to host the events. So how could we move forward with this in our hub or for you in your work? So if you could leave some comments there, that would be great. So thank you all again, and it was great to hear all your viewpoints here. And
yeah, thank you very much. I think we just scratched the surface, right? We could stay digging on so many of those topics, but thank you very much, guys. Really appreciate you joining. It was a quick hour, went pretty quickly. Hopefully you have a look at the paper, and there'll be hopefully future chances to discuss with all of you. Actually, Erica, would love to have you back, and Darko, really interesting the work you're doing and to others. So thanks a lot for joining us. Take care, guys.
thanks,
Thank
everyone.
Okay. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Take care.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.